Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Hearthstone-ish. Today I'm not going to talk about the game per se, but what I am going to do is talk about the new cards coming out for Curse of Naxxramas, which is of course the new expansion coming out soon, or rather new adventure, sort of an expansion. Essentially, today is Thursday, June 19th. Today they actually released the last of the class cards, and so I thought that what I would do is go through each one and talk a little bit about them and see how they go. Before I do that, though, I want to just give a little bit of housekeeping notes. If you want to just get to the content of the video, go right ahead. I will have a link in the description, or even better, in an annotation. You will see it now. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the channel because I actually haven't been especially active lately, as I'm sure you will have noticed. I apologize for that. If you don't know, and I may or may not have said this before, I am actually a graduate student. I have a lot of work on my plate a lot of the time, and it so happens that recently I have had a very large influx of said work on my final paper, my major project. And so I've been doing a lot of work on that, and it's been taking me away from the video game world at least a little bit. What it's actually taken me away from the most is laddering on Hearthstone. One of the major reasons why I haven't produced any content isn't because I'm not following Hearthstone per se, but because laddering has become something that it takes up a lot of time, and for me, I've lost a lot of the enjoyment in just sort of laddering with the same old decks and doing the same old stuff, and what I'm really waiting for is actually the Curse of Naxx expansion. And so I haven't put up any deck videos or laddering videos, and part of that is because I haven't had the time to do that and play, but part of it is also because I haven't been playing a lot of Hearthstone lately for that reason. I really am waiting for this adventure. So I apologize for that. Once it comes out, I will make my every effort to play through the Naxx content and upload it. I'm not going to guarantee it just because I don't know what my schedule is going to be like when it happens. I don't know when it's going to happen. It could be very much crunch time for me, but I'm going to try to do that. Certainly there will be Naxx content updates, much like this one. The other thing that I may well try to do is when I can get the time in, a lot of the time what I like to do is play other games that are sort of less involved than Hearthstone. And so what I might do is a couple more playthroughs, sort of little baby series, as it were. Something like, the Pixel Piracy thing I did was one thing. I might expand that, but also other games that I've been playing lately as well, little indie games, stuff like that. I might throw up a video or two about that just to keep the content rolling when I have the time. But again, it's all going to be time dependent. Between now and the end of July, I have a lot of things to do, and so I apologize if that impacts the amount of content I can put out. In any case, let's get to the matter at hand, to the Naxx cards on the table. So what I'm going to do is go through them in the order we received them. So we're going to start with the Druid, we're going to go to the Hunter. So let's start with the very first class card that we actually got revealed. So this is Poison Seeds, 4 mana, and it destroys everything on the board, including your minions and your opponent's minions, and replaces them with 2/2 treants. So this is sort of this is excellent in my opinion. People have compared it to Twisting Nether for the Warlock, which is of course the card that wipes the entire board. I can't remember right now whether that's 8 mana or 9 mana, but it's one of the two. But so this card destroys everything, but then it replaces them with an equivalent number of treants. So this is really cool for Druids because they don't have any hard removal except Naturalize, which everybody generally agrees is the worst card in the game, or at the very least is really bad. And so Naturalize doesn't get used, and Poison Seeds actually has an opportunity for us to use some sort of hardcore removal as a Druid. So that's really neat. If your opponent has a Ragnaros on the table, now they just have a 2/2 Shri, that's pretty good. It is not going to be a full-out board clear, as a lot of people have said. It will combo very well with Starfall for a 9 mana solution, or a 9 mana board solution rather, where you have Poison Seed Starfall essentially makes it so that it is a board clear. So that's pretty nice. I think this card's actually going to see a lot of play initially, because I think a lot of them will, just because people are trying them out and playing with them. But I actually don't think it's going to see a lot of play all the way through. I like it. It's a really good emergency card, but I don't actually know whether or not it's going to be hyper popular, just because it kills your opponent's tempo, but it also kills yours temporarily. The problem is that your opponent gets the initiative, right? Now that everything is a 2-2 on the board, your opponent gets to choose how to clear things because presumably they're not going to be able to attack right away, they don't have charge. So in order to use this effectively, you need to make sure that your opponent's board is as clear as possible, preferably before you use the card, and then you use it. It would be good because you can take a lot of trades that make your minions down to like 1 health, and then you can sort of quote-unquote heal them with poison seeds, but in any case, you're going to have to be careful about how you use it, so that it doesn't become a, it doesn't give your opponent all of the initiative. Because if you give your opponent, 3 2/2 trees, and you have 3 2/2 trees, it's a board clear, or they can buff them or use them in some way to give themselves board advantage where they might not have had it before. So you got to be careful about it. I think it's a good card, though. I think that it's interesting. I was really quite excited to see this way back when it was first released. I think that it will add a lot of variation to the game that way. Avenge is the Paladin card. It came next. It's a new secret that whenever one of your friendly minion dies, you give a friendly minion a 3/2 bonus. So that's pretty exceptional, right? If you have a 2/1 creature, it now becomes a 5/3, which is very, very scary. Your little 1/1 recruit is now a 4/3. That's pretty excellent. A 3/2 bonus is a really, really significant thing, and so that's a very cool thing to have. Now, the problem is, and I think it was, I forget who it was, one of the professional players pointed out almost immediately when this card was released, this is not the answer that the Paladins need to become viable. Paladins are increasingly finding new and innovative ways to play, but the biggest problem is that right now, they really suck at the early game, right? They don't have any spells for not a lot of mana to deal with early aggression, and this does not help that even a little bit. This is going to be really good in rush decks. This is going to be really good in sort of tempo-oriented, fast early decks, especially because this will absolutely trigger from Get Down Guy, because that does count as a minion. So you can have Get Down and then put this behind it, and when somebody attacks you, not only do you block their attack, but presumably one of your creatures gets a 3/2 buff out of it as well if it dies. So that's actually pretty impressive. That's pretty scary. So that's cool. That's something that I think will be very helpful to rush Paladins. I like the card. I think it's a very strong buff, but I think that it's going to be too situational to get used very often, particularly when we're talking about limited deck space in rush decks, because you sort of have to have the most efficient things possible. This will lose out to Get Down every single time, for instance. And when I say Get Down, of course, I'm meaning Noble Sacrifice, right? And so I don't know whether there's room for both. I'm sure there will be as people try it out. But that's what this is for. This is not good for control, I think, for any reason whatsoever. So it didn't help the control Paladin, didn't help with early aggression, but the rush Paladin might get something out of this, which is cool. Death Spite came next. Death Spite is a really good card, and I think that it will end up replacing the Arcanite Reaper almost entirely in a lot of decks. So Death Spite is a 4/2 weapon. Its death rattle is that it deals 1 damage to all minions. So essentially this is an Arcanite Reaper with 1 less damage, and as a reward for that, it's also 1 less mana, which makes it very good. As a sort of compensation for that penalty, it also functions as a whirlwind. Okay, so now your deck can have 4 whirlwinds instead of 2, which is very, very cool for decks that center around things like, Frothing Berserkers and Armor Smiths and all of the various things that trigger from damage. And so, aside from the fact that, of course, it can function as a clear against something like rush decks, I can see this being very good against things like the Zoo, for instance. So I think that it's very strong. I think that in decks that will run Reapers, primarily things like mid-range rush decks, mid-range tempo, I think what you'll end up finding is that Death Spite will slowly creep in and replace the Arcanite Reapers in almost every case. Other than that, I don't think it's going to see a place in things like Control or things like that. But I actually do like this card a lot. I value it. I think that extra Whirlwind will be very, very good for Warrior rush decks and Warrior sort of mid-range decks in general. I don't know how great it's going to be in something like Control, but it might be good. It might serve as a replacement to something like Whirlwind, although then again, it's Whirlwind's cost that gets it in there, so I'm not sure if it has any viability there. But in any case, it's going to be a really cool card no matter what, and I think it will see a good deal of use. The Anubar Ambusher is interesting. This came out of left field for me. I didn't really expect to see a rogue card like this. But essentially, it's a 4-mana 5/5, which is unheard of. It's absolutely obscene value. And the death rattle is purely bad. Return a friendly minion to your hand. Now, initially when this got released, a lot of people were saying, oh man, they get another Shadow Step, right? They get another Leroy combo. Oh man, OP, this is terrible. You should not listen to those people. Nor should you listen to most people who say things like OP as soon as they see a card for the first time. Pro tip. But what I will say is that this is purely a downside. It's a tempo loss every single time. There is basically no instance in which this will be useful. Things like the SI7 agent, for instance, yeah, you can pick him back up for another 2 damage, but you're spending 3 mana and losing tempo in order to do that. And so, that's not a good deal. The Shadow Step SI7 can be useful sometimes, but that's because it makes it into 1 mana. This will do no such thing. So, actually, when it comes to this card, it needs to be used in decks that don't have a lot of minions. It could be used in a Miracle Rogue to replace something like a Chillwind Yeti, except that Miracle Rogues don't use Chillwind Yetis. It might see some use in a mid-range tempo deck, except that you have to be sure that the tempo deck is not going to have other minions on the table at the same time. Or at the very least, you're going to have to be able to know that you're in control of the field enough to justify the tempo loss, or to be able to control when you lose it. So, it is a scary card in the sense that it's a risk to play, but the stats for the mana is absurd. Now, because it doesn't fit into other archetypes right now, like I said, I think it doesn't do well in a tempo deck, and I think that it actually is of dubious use in something like a Miracle Rogue. Because of these reasons, I don't actually think it's going to see a lot of play right away. I think that it has a chance to spawn some other innovations for the Rogue, combined with the other cards from Naxx, which of course we don't know. I actually think the Rogue could see some play that would be interesting with a new deck archetype, but I don't think that this will fit well into any one that exists right now. Rebirth, which is going to be renamed, by the way. I forget what they're renaming it to, but Rebirth is a druid spell in WoW, and so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do that. I believe it's turning into Reincarnation, actually, now that I think of it, because that's the Shaman spell in WoW. It's just sort of on a lower level, it makes more sense. But in any case, the Shaman card is destroy a minion, and then return it to life with full health, which is brilliant from a death rattle perspective. When I first looked at the card, I thought, this is sort of weird. But then I realized it is entirely a combo card, right? This works perfectly with any death rattle sort of centric cards, which of course works really well with the Naxx adventure as a whole. The thing that I immediately thought of when I saw this was something like Cairn, and I saw something like Cairn with Ancestral Spirit, because essentially what you get then is Cairn, Ancestral Spirit, and Rebirth. You get a Cairn back because of Rebirth, or Reincarnation rather. You get a Cairn back because of Ancestral Awakening, but because he also died, you get a Bane back as well. So you get 3 4/4s on the table, or 4 5s rather, and 2 of them will turn into 4 5s again when they die. So that's a 10 mana combo, but nonetheless, it's a very, very powerful thing. And if it so happens that you have something like a Baron Rivendare on the table at the same time, well, your whole side is going to be full of Yetis, essentially. So it is a combo card that way, and you can abuse it. If you use it with Ancestral Spirit, it's going to be very, very powerful. And something like Ancestral Spirit, Earth Elemental, Rebirth, excellent. You can see a lot of power in this. It can sort of be used as a heal without that, right? If you have an Earth Elemental that's suddenly down to like 2 health, you can pop back up to 8. But I don't actually think that's going to be where it matters. I think it's going to matter with the combos, and with various death rattle mechanics. Now, do I think it's going to be hyper useful in general? Do I think it's going to be combined with a lot of decks as we see them? I don't think so. I think that it's actually too much of a combo card and too situational. But I'm actually interested in what a Shaman Death Rattle deck could do. I actually think it could be quite powerful, and depending on what other cards we get in the Naxxramas expansion, I think that the Shaman Death Rattle deck may be amongst the most potent Death Rattle decks that could be constructed, just because of Ancestral Spirit, and now because of this as well. So keep an eye out for Shaman Death Rattle combo decks, because I think they're going to come up in this expansion. Much the same as I think Death Rattle decks of most classes, but I think Shamans in particular. Duplicate is a new mage secret. It's pretty interesting. So when a friendly minion dies, put 2 copies of it into your hand. This is a tempo loss. Okay, so a lot of people immediately were saying, like, Leroy is going to be OP now because you hit them in the face and your opponent has to leave it on the table, because if they kill it, you get 2 copies of it in your hand and you just win. Sure, I can see the logic, but really, it's tempo loss. It's a gimmick. I think that it's not going to see a lot of play, to be honest. I think that a lot of people are going to try to use it, and they'll find that it is not very consistent. You know, you get cards, but you don't get them immediately in play. And because, you know, by sheer function of duplicate, you have to pay double the mana cost to do that. In some cases, that's okay, but I've seen people saying, oh man, you double Antonidas and then the whole world goes to hell. Well, doubling Antonidas is 2 turns worth of playing basically only Antonidas, which is a terrible tempo move, and if you're that late in the game that you can be doing that, your opponent's probably going to just kill you, right? So, I actually think that it's going to see less use than what some people may think it will. I think it's powerful, and I think it has some good potential, and that Leroy conundrum is an interesting one. I think it will see some use in that initially, but whether it will sort of last the test of time, I don't really think it will. The Void Caller. So this is an interesting one for the Warlock. So Death Rattle is put a demon from your hand into the battlefield. So what's cool about this is that Warlocks are all about cards that hurt themselves, right? Of course. And a lot of the really excellent high-value demons obviously do a lot of damage to you. And so things like, you know, the Pit Lord is a great value card, except that it does 5 damage, right? Even a Flame Imp, great value, but it does 3 damage to you. A Succubus is a neat card in terms of stats, but you lose cards, and it's just not worth it for what the stat distribution is, considering it dies to a 2-mana card, because it's 4/3. Even things like a Doomguard, even things like Felguards, all of these have really bad side effects. There are decks that are out there that sort of minimize that effect, like the Doomguard in Zoo, for instance. You don't really care about the cards at that point. But in general, to play something like a Doomguard in a non-Zoo deck is a very difficult thing to do. The Void Caller actually allows you to do that, right? If you have demons, if you're making a demon deck, this essentially functions as a specific Alarmabot, but better than an Alarmabot because it's harder to kill, and it actually is a minion that does damage and is nice to have on the field anyway. The 3/4 stat distribution is nice. I like it. It is understated for the 4 mana, but I think that the cards balanced the right way, I think. But the 3/4 will allow it to be a little bit harder to kill, which I think is a good thing. In any case, this is a card that I think will help to. I think a lot of Warlock players are sort of interested in the concept of a demon deck. I certainly am. It'd be neat to sort of have a demon-themed deck. It feels like something that should be available, but right now it's just very suboptimal. I think this will help to have some creative players put together lists that are sort of demon-focused that might actually be useful in the long term. So I think this will spawn some creativity. In the current archetypes that currently exist, I actually don't know how well this will do. I think that it will probably not do very well at all, because it's not a very high-value card, and handlocks are hardly demon decks. In a Zoo deck, I don't think it would really fit very well, because again, there are better cards you could be playing for 4 mana, and you don't run a lot of demons anyway. So, I don't know about that. But I think that this will help to inspire new archetypes. Certainly I'm thinking about different things you could do with Death Rattle with a Warlock. Again, I think that the Warlock and the Shaman, both of them have a lot of potential for Death Rattle decks. So, I'm excited about this card. I think it's interesting. This is probably my favorite card of the expansion that has been so far revealed. This is brilliant. It's a 3 mana, 3/4 for the Priest, and the Death Rattle is give a friendly minion 3 health. So, even without the Death Rattle, this card is great. There's no card like it in the game. It's a 3/4 for 3 mana. This is essentially a Yeti at 3 mana. That's great. The Priest needed some help down there. I think people wanted a spell or a 2 mana minion. A 2 mana minion would have been nice, but a 3-mana minion here is also great. I think a lot of people, assume that the Injured Blade Master is sort of basically de facto the priest's 3-mana minion. I like this stat distribution a lot better. The 3/4 is really, really strong, especially early in the game. Very few things can deal 4 damage right away. And, more importantly, the Death Rattle helps to make your entire opening tempo much more durable. So with this, I actually see that we could see some priest tempo decks, some faster priest decks. I think with other cards that are going to come in Naxx, this will actually help it quite a bit to push towards a faster sort of a gameplay, which I think is going to be very good, because right now, a lot of priest decks, a lot of priest players, the worst thing about priest decks, and facing them and playing them, is that the games take forever. There are a couple of people who have made strong priest rush variations, and that's good, but I actually think that it's not where it needs to be just yet to become a real archetype. I think this will make it much, much, much more viable, and I'm really looking forward to that. So, really pleased with this card. Probably my favorite one so far. Really, really like it. And then we have this, released today. Hunter card. It is a 1/1 for 1. It's a web spinner. Death Rattle is draw a random beast card. Now, it's been clarified as well that when they say draw, they probably shouldn't say draw. You don't take one from your deck. You actually get a random beast card from anywhere in the game. That means it could be King Crush. That means it could be a boar. Alright, it could be any beast currently in the game that's not a token. So, that's pretty huge. It's just like, this is just like Thoughtsteal, and it's just like the Warlock card that nobody ever uses, that I'm blanking on the name of, that summons a demon to the deck, to the board. It doesn't actually draw anything from your hand. Any of those cards like that don't actually pull cards from your deck. This is another one of those cards. So, that's really neat. This is going to be good for beast decks, but it's actually going to be good for any deck. Any hunter deck that essentially needs a 1-drop could benefit from this, because it gives them more minions. It gives them tempo cards for free. It sort of, in essence, gives them card draw. And because a lot of their cards synergize well with beast cards anyway, I think that's going to be a bonus. It's just nice that it will be another beast. I think it will make beast decks a little bit stronger, but I also think that it will make appearances in basically any sort of hunter deck. I think this is a pretty powerful card. Now, that said, there's only so many spots you can give to 1-mana creatures, and the hunter already has a couple of really strong ones. The Timberwolf is great, and the Stonetusk Boar is also really good. The Sunshine Hunter, Kalento Hunter mid-range thing died basically as soon as the Unleash the Hounds nerf happened. But they made some really strong use of the Stonetusk Boar. And essentially, it was used as really easy removal, particularly with something like a Hunter's Mark. And so all of those things were very powerful. The web spinner would not allow you to do that, right? The whole thing that was cool about the 1/1 there was that it had charge. And this has no charge. So, on one level, it's actually slower than something like a Stonetusk Boar. On another level, it doesn't buff your team like a Timberwolf would. And so for 1 mana, you sort of have to ask yourself where your most valuable thing is. Especially, too, if you're doing a Face Rush Hunter, you're going to want Leper Gnomes, right? You're going to want things like that. You don't necessarily want cards like this, because you want fast, not necessarily card value tempo. However, in slower decks, in things like control decks, control-oriented decks, I think this is actually going to be very useful, because it will allow people to get card advantage, it will allow people to get more minions on the table, and because it's a 1/1 that sort of contributes to those general goals of getting card advantage and tempo for a control deck, because you want to do that anyway, it also allows, it sort of allows those control decks to have 1/1s in them, right? It allows them to have a 1-drop that allows them some early tempo if they so happen to get it on the first turn. Even if they don't, this is powerful, and it does, I wouldn't say that it would draw silence normally, but given the fact that it's a 1/1 for a hunter, and hunters don't have a lot of silenceable cards with the exception of the Hyena, or the Savannah Highmane rather, I think that this could actually function as a way to draw early silence, which would be really, really good, because, it'll waste a lot of early silences. So, especially in the lower ranks, I think that'll happen quite a bit. People will overreact and be afraid of this card. So, I think that this will be good in some things, bad in others, but I think that it absolutely does have a place within the current meta, and I think that it will fit into a number of hunter decks. So, in any case, that's my sort of first impression for all of the cards that we've seen today, or all of the cards that we've seen to date. I haven't covered the neutral ones because I figured the neutral ones have been covered long ago. But in any case, I just wanted to sort of throw my voice into the arena. I've been mysteriously silent about Naxxramas this whole time, and it's not because I've been not excited about it. Nax was actually probably my first and favorite raid dungeon that I seriously did within World of Warcraft when I used to play it, and I loved it. I absolutely, completely adored Nax, and the fact that it was the first expansion for Hearthstone just made me crazy with glee. I'm just really, really excited to see how they've done it, how they do everything with it. I think it will be absolutely wonderful, and I'm really excited. So, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this, go ahead and subscribe. If you want more sort of Nax coverage, theory crafting, deck building, all that sort of stuff, do let me know. Probably in the first little while of Nax, once we do get an idea of the rest of the cards. Now we know 14 of them. There will be 25 or 30, I forget. I believe 30. If we get all of them sometime, soon, if Nax is released soon, then I'll probably do another one of these for the rest of them, talk about it a little bit, and then we can talk a little bit about how one might go about making decks out of them and that sort of a thing, and of course how you fight back against them, because you and I both know that as soon as we get all these 30 new sexy cards that deal with Death Rattle, every single deck that we play on the ladder for the next 2 weeks is going to have nothing but Death Rattle cards in them. So coming up in the relatively near future when that goes live, I will spend some time talking about how we might go about dealing with that, building some decks that are specifically made to counter Nax Death Rattle decks. But we'll get to that after we have the Nax cards on the table and we know what we're dealing with. So, in any case, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.